We are up and running with yet another installment of character creations, and we're going to be finishing off Gandalf this time. We got very close to finishing off Gandalf, figuratively, not literally. Last time, we don't have that much left to fill in. If it had gotten saved. So instead, I'm just going to do a little verbal recap of Gandalf here and kind of how it should end up. And then talk about where we're going to go from here. So basically, wrapping up Gandalf was going to be pretty simple, straightforward. I was simply going to be padding out his last few levels in Wizard. Just adding a couple more spells on, and that's the primary thing that I was going to go for. It's Gandalf has to come across as more of a fighter build than a wizard build anyways, so I think it was something like 13 levels or 14 levels of brain freeze of fighter just to get the sword abilities and stuff like that. That's what we really cared about for Gandalf right there, and then just wrapping that up, just capstoning that with a few wizard levels is basically all we were doing. So just looking back at the whole Lord of the Rings build that I did, two of them which I apparently didn't save correctly, but we have Gandalf, who's wizard fighter. We have Gimli, who is berserker fighter, Aragorn, who is ranger fighter, and Legolas, who is ranger fighter. All of them map way too well over to fighter for a number of their skills. We're able to pull in some other things, like I think Legolas was primarily ranger in his build, and Gimli was primarily barbarian, but Aragorn, who they call the Ranger of the North, was primarily fighter, and Gandalf was also primarily fighter as well, even though he's a wizard in Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings has a good amount of magic. However, it's not what I would consider a high magic world. It's not something that people really interact with in their regular lives, and even the amount of magic that the characters have isn't as high kind of as you would think. Gandalf, there's some really powerful abilities that they have, like Galadriel, her powers, they're impressive. Gandalf's powers, when he uses them, it can be impressive. However, it's not something that they really rely on in the story or in the movies. It's much more about that almost medieval level fighting where they it's just swords. It's swords, weapons like that. You have your siege engines, things like that. and you don't see, like in D&D, if somebody were to bring what do they call it, the large battering ram at, wow, my brain is just failing me. Minas Tirith, I think. Yeah, no, Gondor. Wait, I can't think of it. My brain is shot, apparently. Wolf battering ram, LOTR. Grand. Minas Tirith. There, I was right. Originally. Yes, good job me second guessing myself. But Grand, like in Lord of the Rings, you had archers that were the only ones that could really take care of it, which meant that you're able to use typical tactics of having shields up above you to like protect you as you move it forward, so you had to shoot from an angle to even be able to get under it. However, in D&D, typically what you would have happen is, oh, they're rolling that up there, you fireball it, then you fireball it again, and the shields just would not be nearly as effective against a fireball as they would be against arrows. So it's a very different game, and different way of building your characters for Lord of the Rings. And just looking at, and that's really obvious in the Gandalf build, where we're dealing with the lower levels of magic in the game. So as we kind of think about, what if you wanted to play an actual game in Middle Earth? What do you have to do with that then? How can you make it a fanciful game, fantasy-based game, with keeping it lower level magic? Is there any like real tricks towards that? Things that you should really pay attention to when creating a world that has that lower level Lord of the Rings type magic? Probably the biggest thing is people should be surprised when magic is done. Now, not necessarily your adventurers, but the common folk. It is an unexpected thing when true magic, like awe-inspiring magic, is done. Another thing definitely to consider, because you don't necessarily see a ton of that in Lord of the Rings. You don't necessarily see the residents of Minas Tirith, I mean, in like awe of Gandalf. You definitely see that in Hobbiton, that they're in awe of Gandalf, but that's a little bit different situation, because I think they'd be in awe of anybody who can do magic. So when thinking about that, like, keep the common folks in awe of magic, and even your adventurers who don't have magic abilities should still potentially be in awe of magic, especially the first time that something magical is cast. Another thing to consider too, that I'd really think about doing, is cap how high you can go in a magic class. In the case of sorcerer, wizard, druid, warlock in particular, I think cleric, depending on how important the gods are in your system, can go higher, but they tend to be less magic-y, like pulling this out of the air. Bard is another one to watch out for. Pulling something out of the air, but it comes from your religious background. And even then, I'd probably encourage anybody who is like, oh, I want to be a healer, go paladin. Get your few spells, use those for healing, but it's a limited resource still, and it should stay that way. If there are, like, particularly, or maybe another thing that you can do, and I was going to say something else first, but this one should be explained before the other one, is magic items. Now, in Lord of the Rings, there's actually, and it's because of The Hobbit, with what Bilbo finds, there are a number of magical type items that Bilbo and then Frodo end up with the sword, with obviously the ring. However, you don't see a ton more after that. So make magical items very rare. Even Gandalf's staff should be something that's fairly rare. The mithril coat, that armor that Frodo wears, that should be fairly rare as well. I mean, that's a higher quality, almost magical quality of armor. So make those things rarer in your game. Then once you've done that, once you've added those few things in, your characters shouldn't know really what they are. Bilbo doesn't know what the ring does when he finds the ring. It's only because he puts it on that he finds out what it does. He doesn't know what Sting does until it starts glowing. Like, these are things that your character should either find out by trial and error, which can be dangerous, or they have to go find those few select individuals who would know how to identify these things. I mean, think about Lord of the Rings, who we know of. Radagast the Brown, Saruman, Gandalf, Galadriel, Elrond. Those are probably the 5 characters that we really get introduced to that you would think, okay, they would be able to identify a higher level magical item, like, or even just a magical item, period. Everybody else isn't going to really know what they're looking at. It's something completely new and completely different for them. So make that harder as well. When they do find something magical, they have to figure out either by trial and error, or they have to find somebody who's able to let them know what's going on. But that should almost be a quest in and of itself, is to figure out what this item does, if there's anything special about it. How you make a game like that more interesting, and it's not necessarily something that you have to worry about, but magical items inherently have this special feel to them. And if you don't have them in your game, consider doing historical items instead. Think about Aragorn's sword. That is a historical item. Think about the horn that Boromir has. Like, all of these things are historical items that they serve a purpose, but they serve the purpose that they were originally intended for. They don't have an extra special secondary purpose in there. I mean, Aragorn's sword does, in the fact that it allows him to gain the help that he wants, but that's about it. Like, and it's not necessarily an easy gain. Like, they're gonna follow him, but yeah. So limit that sort of thing and create historical artifacts instead, and make those something that's very important to your story. Something that you definitely be able to use pretty easily, pretty quickly in a game. Sorry. So, is it better to play a normal level Magic game in Dungeons and Dragons, or does low level Magic work? Should you consider it? It really depends on what you want to run and what sort of world you're setting it in. There are even canon worlds for Dungeons and Dragons that magic is highly frowned upon, because you could end up being corrupted. I believe it's Dark Sun for that one. And then there are other worlds where magic is much more prevalent. So you just have to really decide what you feel like running. I mean, I'm not sure what I would consider. Well, I guess I'd probably consider it a medium weight magic world, that the world that Dungeons and Dragons is being run in. There aren't that many magical artifacts that they've come across. And now they were given some at the very beginning, and it was kind of front loaded that way. But Finia still only has a +1 sword. Tate has a sentient mask that's very powerful. Nim doesn't have any magical items, even though her weapons and her punches count as magical. They're not, in terms of resistance, they're not like a +1 magic item or anything like that. But people don't seem that weirded out in how I've been running the game by seeing magic performed. And some of that is they've mainly spent time in larger towns where it'd probably be more common. A lot of it is religious magic, which, if there's an understanding of religious magic, there's potential to have, like for example, the Bard, people could just assume it's a different form of religious magic. There'd probably then be a backlash against like sorcerer or warlocks who don't have it from that divine sense, that divine position. But it depends a lot on what you want to run. There's no right answer that says, oh yeah, you have to do your game this way, or you have to have this many magic items. Even, I mean, they give you suggestions in the Dungeon Master's Guide, I believe it is. Yeah. About when you should get like +2 items, +3 items to hit, +1 items to hit. But that's really a suggestion, and with how you build encounters in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, you're fine leaving them off. You don't have to worry about, oh, if somebody doesn't have all 3 of their items attuned, that they're not going to be able to defeat a creature. And the more encounters you do and stuff like that, the better feel you're going to get for something like that. So this is wrapping up the Lord of the Rings section, just kind of talking about the type of world that you would want to be building. I think I'm going to cut it short. It's like 60 something degrees outside, and I want to grill. And I believe it says on our site, but we're from Minnesota, so when we get 60 something degree weather in March, even at the end of March, it's like gotta bust out the grill for the first time. see what it is. So I'm going to sign off, even though this is a little bit shorter than I had intended. I would have otherwise done the finishing building out Gandalf and then talked a little bit about this, since I only had a few levels left. But I'll be back next Tuesday, and I believe my plan for next Tuesday is to start building Daredevil. And I'm going to have to like quadruple check that I've saved it correctly, because I don't know why it doesn't seem to like me. I think some of the issue is that it will restart, or my computer will restart from time to time just with Windows updates, which is annoying, but also it's decent to know that my computer is actually having stuff updated and protected on it. So huzzah for that. Anyways, with that, I'm going to sign off. I will be back on Thursday, and it looked like my audio did not work for my Angel campaign idea. So I'm going to do probably a 15-20 minute recap on that and redo that. So say hello, Louise. Nope, not talkative today. So with that, I am going to sign off.